been levitated over the stairs. Human spirits are real. They interact with us. I treat the living and the dead exactly the same.
I don't necessarily know that a lot of what we experience when it comes to a haunting is an outside source.
Why don't we have manifestations of Santa Claus? That doesn't generate the same EMF. They have a creation of a spirit called a tulpa. He created an entire tiger out of his own energy and had it roaring and chasing them.
When I was a kid and I became really scared and I felt like there was something there, I would lay in my bed and I would imagine that there was always this light around me, and that was like a force field or a protective layer for me.
White light. The Smurl House. That's the one that's going to be the new Conjuring film. I was there.
Now, today's guest is not just a witness to paranormal history. In fact, he's a part of it. We're joined by Chris McKinnell, the grandson of legendary investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. But more than that, he's a lifelong seeker of truth in a world that most fear to face. Now, Chrissy began investigating at just 16 years old, mentored firsthand by, you guessed it, by Ed and Lorraine. Now, one of his earliest leadership roles, the now infamous haunting in Connecticut, a terrifying case involving a family that was living in a former funeral home. Now, long before the movie, Chris was there. He was listening and documenting and trying to help. Now, since then, he's handled over 10,000 cases around the world. He's the co-founder of the Warren Legacy Foundation, a global network of investigators and clergies and counselors devoted to helping people suffering from spiritual crisis. And he does it completely free of charge. His approach, it bridges psychology and faith and, of course, a little bit of empathy. He's not chasing ghosts. He's chasing healing. With appearances in documentaries like The Devil on Trial, doing global lectures, and his relentless commitment to integrity, Chris is both a protector of his grandparents' legacy and a reformer that, in my opinion, is pushing the field forward. And here's something that I'm truly excited to share with each and every single one of you. Chris is now offering a monthly Zoom presentation that goes far beyond any of the cases that they've ever covered. I'm talking about deep dives into the mechanics of the paranormal, exploring everything from theory to protection and how even hauntings manifest across different cultures around the world. Talking about the psychological and spiritual layers of entity encounters, and much, much more. What makes it so special is that each one of the sessions is tailored to really what the audience wants to learn. To sign up, all you got to do is head down into the description down below, and there you'll find a link. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. But now, on with the show. Chris, welcome to the show. It's truly an honor to have you on. I'm sure everyone, based on the intro you just heard, I'm pretty excited to have you here. It's funny because I was looking just in the last year on my channel of cases that I've covered, and surprisingly, your family comes up a lot in my episodes. It's kind of amazing.
Well, it's not really surprising to me. They were pretty involved in an awful lot of cases. But thank you very much for having me on. It's a real pleasure.
Pleasure's all on this side, I can assure you. You know, you've done over 10,000 cases with your grandparents' legacy. I mean, if you had to guess, how many cases do you think they probably did?
But that was 10,000 in the 80s, and I'm guessing they probably were up to about 12 or 13,000 by the end.
A lot of times now when I do cases, not myself doing cases, but when I look at cases and I tell the stories for the podcast, a lot of times the name pops up and I had no clue. Like a prime example, one of the last podcasts that I did it on Dudleytown, Connecticut.
Yeah.
I did that with zero idea that Ed and Lorraine was tied to that case at all. It wasn't until I started doing my deep research that they popped up, and I'm like, you have to be kidding me. People are going to start thinking that I'm part of the family. At this point, I've covered so many cases that they've covered, but that amazed me.
Yeah, they had a famous story that they told. They were with WFSB Channel 3 for a Halloween episode. And they had a brand new camera, truck, and everything. And they were supposed to be going into Dudleytown, doing a whole episode on it. And just when they were supposed to go on the air, the batteries died. Everything. And
that's insane.
Personally, I mean, I've been there with my grandparents a few times. We used to bring little groups into there and show them it back when it was open to the public. Now it's not. You'd go down Dark Entry Road and be there, but there are plenty of explanations that are natural for
Yeah.
what took place there, like a wheat infection that may have caused some problems and mercury poisoning and things of that nature. So, yes, I believe, and I felt residual energy. There's probably some spirit still stuck there as well, but I don't believe it was cursed.
That's interesting. Of course, for me, for YouTube and all of you that probably watched that episode, I totally called it cursed because clickbait. so I apologize. Heard it here first.
Well, no,
Listen, Chris telling the truth on me.
It wasn't. I can't say it wasn't cursed.
50-50.
Yeah.
I'll take it. I'll take whatever I can get. 50-50 is fine. It's kind of amazing though. Just that. And then, I think everyone's done an episode on infield. Another one that I don't hear a lot of podcasts talk about. Again, I didn't know your family was associated. Borley Rectory.
Oh, big one.
Had no clue. Had zero clue that they were associated until I did the research.
The thing you have to keep in mind, my grandparents didn't have mentors.
Yeah.
And the one person my grandfather looked up to was a man named Harry Price. And from the 30s to the 50s, Harry was a famous investigator in England. He was actually friends with Houdini. He didn't get along with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. They clashed because Harry made a career out of both exposing fakes and promoting real people. But my grandfather loved him. And one time they went to Borley. I wasn't with them. Borley Rectory burned in, I think, 53 or 54. It's a famous poltergeist case. And the church is still there. So they had visited the church. I've been there as well with my grandparents and alone. But as they were entering, my grandfather heard this ding! And from the rafters, a penny fell at his feet. And it was the same year my grandfather was born. He considered it a gift from Harry Price. As a matter of fact, we were in Halifax, Nova Scotia for something called Transylvania Weekend. It was a gathering of a few researchers. Back when I was, basically a kid. I was in college. And I came back to the hotel room I was sharing with my grandparents, and the door was locked. Okay. And my grandfather opens it. It's pitch black, and he says, "Shh, there's a ghost in the room." I was like, okay. So I walk in, sit down on the end of my bed, and my grandmother's talking to Harry Price.
Wow.
Harry had sensed that there was this gathering, and he wanted to be included. He asked permission to be there. And my grandfather, of course, being a fanboy of this man, was like, yes, of course. And then Harry said something to my grandmother that at the time I couldn't believe. But he said, "I'm going to be watching over your grandson for the rest of his life because he's going to be very important in this work." And I thought, I don't think so.
And look at you now.
I don't know. But the truth is, when my son was afraid of the dark growing up, I would tell him about our family ghost, Harry, who would always protect him. So I thought that was nice.
For the record, anyone that's watching or anyone that's listening, you're going to find Chris is a very humble guy. He doesn't like to take credit where I think it really belongs. But you've really kind of revolutionized the way that a lot of this is done. And in a way that I think it will be life-changing, because the way that we do things, and by we, what I mean is I also have a secondary podcast that I do with a buddy of mine, Nick. We're doing our first sets of investigations this September. Now, I've done investigations before, but a lot of the way that you think, when I talk, it's amazing because I find a lot of correlations. And I'm like, I always thought I was that guy that was way out there on some of these things. So to hear someone else at least even be remotely close to me in some capacity, I'm like, okay, well, I can't be too far off. If someone, the size and recognition of you and your family can say something like that, it's like, okay, because I don't necessarily subscribe to a lot of the things that I hear a lot of investigators say.
Yeah. I see, after what, 44 years of doing this, I know the phenomena is real. I know for a fact. I mean, I've experienced it. Things that are supposed to only happen on the quantum level, the subatomic level, are taking place here and now in the physical realm. So I know that's real, but I'm not going to fall back on superstition to explain it.
Yeah.
Mankind, we're storytellers, and we can't deal with cognitive dissonance. We can't deal with the unknown. If we're faced with that, we would rather believe in the devil, because then we have a name and a thing that we can blame, and then we can fight against it. But the unknown is terrifying.
100%.
And for me, it's just a source of wonderment. I've had amazing things. I've been levitated over the stairs. I've been thrown across the room in a bed with my cousin, and it made me laugh my butt off. I just thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever experienced.
Well, that was probably not what it's going for.
No, well, there wasn't it involved. Here's the thing. This was a poltergeist case in Tewksbury, Massachusetts, and everything had been fine for 2 years. But I was friends with the family. I was trying to work out a support group for families going through this kind of bizarre phenomena. And the woman of the house wanted to help, as did Carmen Snedeker from the Haunting in Connecticut case.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so she invited us to spend the night. My cousin had never been there before. He'd never been involved with the case. He didn't really believe in that particular case. So the 10-year-old had to give up his bed to us, and he was in a sleeping bag on the floor. We were in our sleeping bags on the bed. And then my cousin starts yelling at me that I'm kicking the bed after we turn out the lights. I'm like, I'm still in my sleeping bag. I'm not doing anything. So we turn the lights out again. Bed picks up, flies 10 feet across the room, smashes down, and breaks into pieces. My cousin left smoke rings. He got out of there so fast. It was like the road runner. He gets downstairs, and the woman's name was Lorraine, just like my grandmother. Mm-hmm. And she looks at him, and she says, "So, you believe me now?"
Go figure, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, nothing ever happened again. Just
That's
that one incident after 2 years of complete calm. I still believe to this day it was that 10-year-old boy. He had hooked into the energy that was still there. He was so angry that we were there, and he threw us across the room. He didn't mean to. He doesn't probably even wasn't never even aware of it. But I think that's what I find so amazing about the paranormal. If we let go of our fear and if we truly understand what we're dealing with, I think it's an incredibly empowering field of study. And miracles are possible if we work out how to do it. I've seen amazing people with discipline do miraculous things. Tibetan monks or Hindu gurus and so forth, sadhus, and they're just amazing what they're capable of. And that takes discipline. But when it's undisciplined, when it's just straight, raw emotion, it's always going to be fear, anger, hatred, because nothing pumps out EMF more from you than that does. We generate electromagnetic fields with our heart.
Yep. It's
not a lot of energy, but when you're angry or terrified, you're pumping out a lot more. I think actually, I'm working on a theory called temporal overlap theory, because time and space are connected. You cannot have one without the other.
Yep.
And if you think of, let's just use an analogy here, a tabletop as all of time and space. It all exists in one state. Anybody who's not part of time and space sees it all at once. Mm-hmm. And I think that like a battlefield, let's just take, for example, Gettysburg.
Okay.
Everybody remembers it. Everybody goes back there and renews the connection to it. And those boys who were pumping out all that energy in that moment, I think they created a quantum tunnel, a tether to our time. And people who are sensitive can experience that in real time. They're not able to change it because that moment is its own time. So what we call a residual haunting may actually be a tunnel through time, and we're experiencing what they actually are going through in their own time. I was in Devon in England with my grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
And now this one kind of screws up my theory a little bit, because I think that it takes a conscious effort to keep that tether going.
Yep.
Like the Tower of London, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
People visit there, they know about it. But in this case, we were in a pub having lunch, and my grandmother looks outside the window, and she sees Roman legionnaires marching past the window, but only from about here up. The rest of them is underneath the ground. And my grandmother, of course, shocked by this.
Yeah.
And she tells the pub owner, this sweet lady, and the woman said, "Oh, that makes perfect sense. The Roman road's about 5 feet below the current road."
It's so funny that you say this. I was literally going to ask a question about this because on my other podcast, Nick and I, we've had a conversation. We found I don't know who did this document. It was amazing, but it talked about, it was what would be quoted as a residual haunting. And it showed that this entity would walk through the wall.
Because there was no wall there.
There was no wall there. And what's funny is it would walk upstairs, and we hypothesized that a lot of times if we believe that something's floating or potentially that it's part of its body is gone, it's just that it could be that there was a change in floor plans or something along that line. And that's why we're seeing it the way that we see it, which
Exactly.
is basically what you're saying. Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. The whole stone tape theory that people think of as explaining residual hauntings.
Yeah.
Was created by a BBC drama writer in like 1972 as a literary device, a dramatic device to explain this TV show called The Stone Tape Theory. There's no basis in reality to that. There's no scientific basis.
Like when you think about all the different ways that we try to measure or we try to comprehend, and listen, I tell people all the time, regardless of how long you've been doing this, prime example, I might not have been doing this very long, but I've been experiencing it for a very large amount of my life. And I've changed my thoughts and theories on many things. And a lot of times it comes from just there wasn't enough information for me. An interesting thing that I've came across here somewhat recently, or should I say, I guess my thought process has changed. I don't necessarily know that a lot of what we experience when it comes to a haunting is an outside source, similar to the story you talked about with the little boy and how he may have manifested that. And I'm wondering how much infield is probably a great example of this, right? My understanding is nothing happened in infield for like 10 years. And then all of a sudden, when there was the divorce, the dad moves out. Now all of a sudden there's animosity with the children. We've got anger. Then boom, all of a sudden we've got paranormal.
Yeah. That's what I've learned. Yep.
It goes back to really that energy theory, which is kind of what you've alluded to also, is possibly there's that energy that causes that. But where do you think, and I think I heard you say it in a different interview, once energy is created, it's not like it just leaves. It manifests somewhere in some facet.
Here's the thing. I believe in human and inhuman spirits, but we don't. The stories we tell ourselves about these inhuman spirits give us power over them. Religion can be a wonderful tool in combating these things. Every religion, it's not just one. It isn't about the religion. It's about you and your belief system and focusing your faith through ritual as a way of manipulating your local environment. But I mentioned earlier Tibetan monks. They have a creation of a spirit called a tulpa. A tulpa, T-U-L-P-A, is a spirit created by them with their discipline. For instance, one of my favorite stories is of an old monk. He was annoyed that the young beginners were making too much noise in the monastery, he created an entire tiger out of his own energy and had it roaring and chasing them in the hallways, and then it would dissipate. In witchcraft, a group can get together and create a similar thing called an egregore, but that's done with group effort. I think that explains your demons. That explains many cryptid sightings, although I also have other perfectly normal explanations for a lot of those. And then I have some I really can't understand. I've had cases where things have shown up and I'm like, what the hell is that? But I have learned, just like you, to adapt and evolve with new evidence. My grandparents, people don't understand. The first 6 years of their career, back in 47 up until 52 or so, they didn't even believe in demons. Mm-hmm. And they were Catholic. They could have gone right there immediately. But they had all of this phenomena that they couldn't explain as ghost. And so they fell back on their religion to explain it. And that's perfectly fine. I understand that. But don't look at their old books. Don't look at their old videos and think you're seeing where they ended up. My grandfather thought witchcraft was Satanism until the late 80s. It took me forever to get him to break that idea. Right. He thought rock and roll was the devil's music and you'd go to hell if you listened to it wrong. And boy, I missed a lot of good rock and roll growing up.
Which makes perfect sense. It's funny because I think anyone, first off, I believe this is just my thing, and people's probably going to say again, this is the way Bert sees it. But when I look at, let's use as an example, your family, if you get past the sensationalized dramatizations of their true cases, like if you look at, let's use, for example, I think you and I talked about it before the podcast, like the Connecticut haunting.
Right.
Significantly different. And you was a part of that.
Yeah. I led that investigation for 9.5 weeks, except for one night. I was in there every single night. But the book is a piece of garbage. My grandparents never wrote any books. Don't blame my grandparents. They had ghostwriters. And the man that wrote that book, I gave him my detailed minute-by-minute notes of that case. And he ignored it all to create this lurid fantasy that was pretty over the top. And now, unfortunately, I've noticed that even the participants in the household have changed their story over time. It's like, come on. I get it. Your memory changes and everything. I certainly could not put myself back 40 years and tell you exactly what happened there. I only remember the highlights, but at least admit it that, you know what? I don't really remember the details. Like the Smurl House. That's the one that's going to be the new Conjuring film. I was there, but I don't remember the details. I just remember what happened to me because, I got levitated over a set of stairs. I was like, I'll remember that.
Oh, yeah. I know how you forget that part.
I remember her telling me about she had this problem in her belly, and when they examined, she had a partially digested fetus. It was her twin that she had absorbed in the womb, and it was like this hairy mass. Now, that's not terribly unusual, but it was still creepy as hell.
Oh, for sure. But I think that's where the viewers and the listeners have to kind of lean back and understand that though the films are amazing, like they're fun, but you have to separate the fact from the fiction. That's not what the Warrens were. That wasn't what your family lineage was about. In fact, it was quite the opposite. But, we have to remember that much like you, they handled these cases and they didn't charge a dime. They would just drop whatever they were doing to come and help a family. And in my personal opinion, this is just my opinion. A lot of people like to say a lot of things now when everyone has passed away. And to me, that's something you even if you dislike someone, you let the past be the past, whether you believe something happened or not. But more importantly, now you want to bring things up, but they can't defend themselves. And that's why I think I get so annoyed with some of the things I hear, because a lot of the things I hear, they never even said. It was said somewhere else that was dramatized as them.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I liked the first Conjuring movie, hated the second one.
Mm-hmm.
And the only part of the third one I liked was the very final scene, where my grandfather gives a gazebo to my grandmother, because that is the only scene in any of the movies that was based on actual reality.
And it's still there, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Those cases are real, but the details in Hollywood, the most overused marketing tool in Hollywood is based on true events or inspired by a true story.
For sure.
It doesn't mean you're seeing what happened. These are not documentaries. Hell, even the documentaries are not particularly accurate. They're there to get Netflix views or whatever.
Correct. And let's be honest, that's where the money's at anyway. Now, when it comes to your grandparents, though, I mean, obviously, that's where you kind of started. What was a piece of advice that they gave you, specifically yourself, that kind of echoes in your head now when you're trying to help other families? Because obviously, there's still some things that's coming from them. Some people may say it's like a manifestation of their thought process that hits you and your team.
Well, my grandmother still comes around. Human spirits are real. They interact with us. I treat the living and the dead exactly the same. You're just another person to me, and I'm here to help. But the one piece of advice that I have always used that I got from them is about filling your home with positive energy. When you're dealing with a haunting, you want to clean it out, get it uncluttered. Watch comedies, play games together. Don't argue. Take it outside, resolve it, and then come in. That was amazingly good advice, because that's half the battle. There's always underlying issues that make a person vulnerable to a negative haunting, a negative manifestation. And if we deal with the person holistically, then we're going to be much more likely to be successful. It's when we ignore the trauma or the mental health issues or the drug abuse or whatever it is that's making that family vulnerable, that it will remanifest. It will come back again.
Which makes sense. When it comes to the concept of evil, do you believe that because obviously there's even cultural shifts when you look at it, whether it's demonic or malevolent or whatever it may be. And something fascinating, and I've not put it out yet, I'm still sitting on it, but I did an interview with she's 19 years old. But she was from India. And it's funny because, I allow people to come on and tell their stories and have a platform. And, if you talk about demonic realms, they have no concept, no clue as far as what you're talking about. She had a different name for it, and I can't remember exactly what she called it, but she talked about it. Didn't affect her directly, but it really made me lean back and go, if you don't have a concept about something, and I think it was Katrina Weldman, I think that's her name. She's a psychic medium, I believe. But she had even said that she had went overseas and they kept talking about this entity and she couldn't see it. But they'd be like, it's right over there. It's right over there. And she thought they were cuckoo. She thought there was nothing to it. But she said as she spent more time there and as she was almost able to imagine the creature or hear what they said about it, all of a sudden now it started manifesting to her. And it really made me lean back and think, well, maybe we're creating these concepts and ideas that then opens that possibility. So us talking about a demon in India or, wherever it may be, there's no concept. So there'd be no manifestation of that versus here there would be. Is that what you also find, or do you differ in that opinion?
It's very, very similar. I've been lucky. I've lived all over the world on 5 different continents. And hell, I'm in Paraguay now. And what I've found is these things manifest according to our cultural and spiritual beliefs, or the beliefs of somebody who was there previously. For instance, there was a case in Australia where there was an average Australian family living there, but they were being haunted by an Indonesian-style demon. And it turned out that the family that had been there previously had used rituals of protection and summoned up a spirit to protect the land, and that's what was manifesting.
Oh, wow. That is fascinating. So even
Yeah.
though they inadvertently had to deal with it, it still came from that previous culture. See, that
Exactly.
is mind blowing. So then I guess a question I would have then based on that, would you see belief in a specific religion or a culture? Would you see that as a weapon or as a vulnerability?
No, I don't like the word weapon. It's a
Yeah.
tool.
Or a tool. Yeah.
Yeah. Your religion can lead you to a relationship with God, but I don't believe it's necessary. That's a well-worn path that's been laid down by somebody previously. And I have nothing against that. I'm a pastor, but I'm a pastor who doesn't believe in any particular religion. I think if you are empathetic and compassionate to others and you believe that this is what God would want from you, then you're as close to God as you're ever going to get. It didn't take memorizing some scriptures. I've studied with the Dalai Lama. I've studied with the Kogi people in the jungles of Colombia and Buddhist temples in Thailand and everywhere else, and the animists in West Africa. They all are effective tools for working with the spirit realm. I just recently read about an amazing thing that blew my mind. There is a cave in Australia, people can Google this, where there is proof that they used the same ritual, the Aborigines, the same ritual for 12,000 years until the 1800s. Why would a people continue to use something like that unless it worked? You do not put tallow or human fat or animal fat on a stick and burn it over a fire in such a way to break a spiritual connection unless it's working.
That's true. You're not wrong. And, it really makes me think then because you probably have an insight that most people don't have. Prime example, my buddy Nick and I from the other podcast, we're going to be doing our investigations in September. And, I do have a religious background myself. So, my beliefs are going to be predominantly based on what I think is legit. Now, Nick, he's completely agnostic. He's of the two of us, he's the one that's kind of like, give or take, whatever it may be. And he doesn't that's the great thing about that podcast is, well, I'm this guy that has this belief system. He's not. So it's like the two of us that kind of have that conversation. And that's changed my views on some things, to be honest. And I'm sure mine's probably changed his views on some things. But with you, I mean, you've investigated on multiple continents. I mean, what's one place that kind of surprised you with an interpretation or a dealing of the paranormal that maybe even changed your point of view because you have an insight that most people probably do not?
There's an infinite number of stories I can share with you. For instance, the Kogi people don't have a concept of fiction.
What?
At all. So when they talk about dragons, they're talking about literal dragons that are part of their culture and their worldview. But early on, I had spent a year traveling Europe and the Middle East, and I was in Egypt in the City of the Dead. I'd been brought there by two young men that I'd befriended. They were working in a pizza place, and they took me out for the day before I left Cairo. And the City of the Dead is an ancient graveyard, but people live there. There's electricity. There are people running water. It's an entire giant community for poor people. And I was talking to this woman. She had multiple children, and she told me about how there are genies, if you will,
Yep.
that are there protecting some of these tombs, and you can never go into those particular tombs. And one of her children was playing on top of one of the tombs, and she screamed for the child to get off. And the child tumbled off, startled, I assume, tumbled off the other side. And when they ran to rescue the child, make sure she wasn't hurt, She was gone. Never, ever came back. Just poof.
Wow.
So that was kind of shocking. Yeah.
Now, for like investigators here, because here in the States, obviously, I feel like almost every single, when it comes to paranormal channel, they're all copy and paste. And, that's it probably will come off facetiously. And I don't mean it to be that way. If you're an investigation team and that's the way you do stuff, I totally get it. But, for our investigations in September, I'm trying to change the way that we do things. So a prime example, I'm going back to old media styles. And by that, what I mean is, for whatever reason in my head, I've got this idea concocted that possibly old ways of doing things may present more evidence than some of the new technologies we have. So a prime example, a digital camera is literally just a series of pixels, but that pixels being determined what it's supposed to be. But like I bought Polaroid, we're going to go 35 millimeter. We'll still do some of that new age stuff too. But even as far as I bought cassette players with cassette tapes.
That's good.
For me, I just feel like there's got to be something to that medium.
Much better. The problem with digital is, and I see this every day, and folks, if you're listening, please understand, don't zoom in on your digital photographs hunting for something. If something's actually trying to manifest, I promise you it'll be obvious.
Yeah.
Because when you zoom in, or even when it's anomalous looking, a digital camera makes patterns out of it. It will make something that sort of looks like a face. And as you zoom in, it'll look more and more like one. That doesn't mean that's what you're actually seeing. Old school cameras are much better for getting good evidence. I didn't realize they still made 35 millimeter film. That's great.
You got to get it. Polaroid, luckily Polaroid is just now coming back out with a lot of their series. And it's pretty fascinating that a lot of investigators are not doing that nowadays. Cause I feel like I remember back to watching that show, Unsolved Mysteries, and they would show those Polaroid photos, and those were always cut and dry. Now, one of the things that I talk about on my podcast, and I do have a Reddit thing, Reddit subreddit, where I allow people to send stuff over, and I go, do I think there's something there? I see an abundance of orbs, and I'm like, it's almost always dust or it's an insect.
Right.
As a teenager, I saw an orb myself, IRL. And it was fascinating. It wasn't long after my grandmother passed away. And I'm not saying that was her. It just happened to be in that time frame. But our house was really old. It was built in the 1890s, I believe. But it was really tall doorways, and it had a glass fixture at the top that in the old days you could tilt open and would allow air in. And I was laying there, and I remember looking out the corner of my eye, and I saw a very bright object. And when I looked at it, it went through the glass. So it went through the actual glass pane, and it went around the room slow, and it circled, and then it went right back out the glass pane. Now, you have to understand, my dad is a joker. So my assumption as a teenager is, well, my dad's got a flashlight and he's buzzing around. But then I started thinking about it. I'm like, this bright object that I saw, it didn't reflect and it didn't put light on anything else, which if it's a flashlight, it's going to illuminate something.
Right, of course.
But this didn't illuminate anything. It was like it was a self-contained bright light. And I'll never forget it. It was the brightest. It would be like the equivalent of like a fluorescent light by today's standards, probably like 56 Kelvin or somewhere in that realm. And to this day, I remember it so vividly. But I tell people, unless you've seen it with your eyes, I don't think that an orb in a manifestation of a photo is probably an orb. It's a dust or an insect or something like that.
Sadly, I get those all the time. I've never seen an orb in real life myself. I've seen a million things, but I've never seen an orb. I've seen real ghosts, never seen an orb. But, you see these undulating white lines in a photo. Yeah, that's an insect in flight, and it's a slow exposure on the digital film. That's all it is. Oh, look at the angel flying around. No, that's a moth.
That's a moth. That's a moth. Sorry.
Yeah, so I feel bad, but if you go into this labeling everything paranormal, that's not the way to be a researcher. You must be skeptical. You must, as much as I know everything can happen, it doesn't mean it does on every case. And here's a word of advice for anybody watching. When you're actually dealing with something paranormal, and I actually had a case yesterday, this poor woman in Argentina, right across the river, has a early onset dementia. The children have heard music playing in the upstairs of the house. There's been doors opening and shutting and things of that nature. They saw some shadows moving. Okay, yes, there was a ghost in the house. Absolutely. But the dementia is only dementia.
Yeah.
And the problem is people, once the paranormal is involved, you want to blame everything on the paranormal. That's not true, but it's also quite dangerous because you're now feeding this manifestation to become something it wasn't originally. It's, when you hear, and I've said this a million times, so I'm sure you've heard it if you watched any of my interviews, but when you hear the footsteps in the hall in the middle of the night or the rap on the door, it's not the devil. The devil's not going to rap on the door. Right. He's not polite. I don't believe in the devil, but he's not polite. It's going to be, your grandmother or the old man that used to live there. That's all.
Which makes perfect sense. I would agree with that too. And it's funny because we're talking about these. I hate using the terminology ghost hunters. I hate that term.
Oh, I hate that. I mean, it was my grandparents' title, but I don't hunt people.
So exactly. Like I like when people say, "Oh, you're a ghost hunter." I'm like, I prefer paranormal investigator. Like that's just how I look at it. But when it comes to the TV style, or even, YouTube has turned into a lot of the old TV shows and how they've done it. A lot of the investigators, and they go in provoking a lot of the stuff. And I told Nick, I said, for me, I want to be respectful because if I'm a human spirit or whatever that entity is, and I come in and I'm yelling and cussing and try to provoke it, I'm not doing anything. I'm taking vacation. You're not getting anything from me.
Either that or you're going to provoke it and get the wrong response. If I go into your house and I start screaming at you, how are you going to react?
True. That's very true. That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. And I think if you're going to go in there, you don't go in with, what's your name? How'd you die? No. Yeah. First you lay down spiritual boundaries. You must be very clear, just like personal boundaries. I'm here to help. If you'll allow me to, I'd like to help you. But you may not follow me home. You may not interact with me after I leave here. Only while I'm here. And I'm only here to help. Make it clear. And you should be protecting yourself with whatever ritual focuses your faith and your intention for protection, both before and after you've done a visit.
Out of curiosity, someone like Nick, who would be an agnostic, what would something be that he would lean into?
That's up to Nick. He's not going to use a talisman or a relic because that's not a meaningful focus for any faith. If he doesn't believe in any higher power whatsoever, see, I spent the first 50 years of my life trying to understand God, the mind of God. I studied every religion I could. Some you've never even heard of, like Umbanda or Kimbanda. But it wasn't until I accepted my ignorance that I was able to find my faith. My acceptance that God's perspective is greater than mine. Whatever God is, we don't understand it. It's too big. NASA is actually the one that taught me to have faith. NASA. They said, a few years ago, they said, there are more living worlds in the universe than grains of sand on Earth. I thought, well, if there is a creator, I sure as hell am not able to understand that.
Right.
So that's how I found it. I think of God like as a cosmic weaver. And I'm just one thread in an infinite tapestry, and I have to have faith he's going to put me where I'm needed.
Something I've never divulged on any podcast, because, I'm still coming into a lot of this too, because even though people go, there's not a stigmatism to this anymore. I'm like, well, it kind of is a little bit in some capacity.
Yeah. And depends on where you are.
Oh, 1,000%, 1,000%. But I think back to when I was a kid and I was always super scared of a lot of things. And I invented in my head this concept, and I don't know why I did it. I can't even begin to understand where it came from. But when I was a kid and I became really scared and I felt like there was something there, I would lay in my bed and I would imagine that there was always this light around me. And that was like a force field or a protective layer for me.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, I never, like sometimes my entire fear would go away. And it wasn't until probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that someone talked about building this
White light.
Yes. And I'm like, that's really kind of the same thing. When I was a kid, I tried to make it cool. You talked about NASA. That's what stimulated that thought. I'm like, this is my protective white astronaut suit, and they can't penetrate this. And I don't know that whenever I've went into something scary, even when I've done some investigations before when I was younger, I always imagined that there was this force field around me. And for whatever reason in my brain, that was just my way of saying, I'm fine. Like nothing can hurt me in this realm. But it's weird because this other person said you can technically push that boundary to even other people that's in your proximity.
Yes, you can.
See, that's amazing. You're the first person I've talked to that's ever even had this thought process. So that's could potentially be like a legit thought process.
Oh yeah, no, it is. What I teach is that you imagine it in your chest, growing and filling you up completely, and then spilling out of your body and surrounding you. You can then surround the entire home, your loved ones, whatever you want. Because what you're calling on, from my perspective, is a higher power to come fill you up, surround you, and protect you. When you're connecting with that, there are no limitations to that higher power. I mean, we're just one tiny speck in an infinite universe. Its perspective, its reach is a heck of a lot farther than ours. So you can protect someone in India or Mars.
That's fascinating. See, the other person didn't go into it quite so deep. So that's really because the first location we're going to in September it's called the Hinsdale House. It used to be known, it used to be known as the Dandy family that lived there. And the thought process is that it's not a human spirit; it is an elemental, is what a lot of the people that are proponents of that property believes, including I think the owners even alluded that he believes it's elemental because there's also cryptid sightings and UFO sightings in that same area. And I think it's just one and the same. I don't think it's separate. I think it's all one. Again, going back to like, if I think that there's a demon, well, maybe for whatever reason, a demon's going to pop up. If I believe in cryptid, maybe a cryptid will pop up, you know what I'm saying? So
Go in there not knowing. That's the best way.
That's smart. That's very smart.
Don't go in with any preconceived notions. I don't allow psychics to lead investigations. I don't allow psychics to give their impressions on a case until after the rest of the team has done their due diligence and done their first night's investigation. Then they compare notes. That way there's no research bias.
That's smart.
So don't go in thinking, like my grandfather made the mistake with Annabelle. And I love my gramps, but he had gone in with the preconceived notion it cannot be a little girl because God wouldn't allow a child to possess a doll. Turns out I know of cases where children have attached themselves to dolls so that they could interact with their family after they died.
Oh wow!
I don't believe Annabelle is a human spirit. I don't believe Annabelle is a demon. It's another example of an egregore, which is also what a poltergeist is most times. Sometimes a poltergeist can be psychics without a control abilities. They can be ghosts who are just pissed off as hell and don't want you in their home. So.
Well, kind of based on what you just, because now my brain's going 1,000 miles an hour. When you talk about, and you're saying it's an egregore, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So earlier when we talked about this similar thing, you said it was a series of people that in essence is building this entity somewhat, right? Well, that would be similar to Annabelle because the thought process was there was those two roommates, and then eventually the one's boyfriend, I believe, that they came up with the story of, I think it was Annabelle Higgins, I think was the name.
No, not quite. There was a medium involved.
Medium,
once the doll's hands moved up on the table, they contacted a friend they knew who called herself a medium, who came up with this story. Once they gave form to it, they poured all their love into it, and it started acting like a little girl. It would move from place to place when they weren't home playing hide and seek. It would leave messages on parchment paper with crayon. They didn't own either of those things.
It was positive. It was always positive.
At first. At first. It was things like want to play, miss me. But the girls started to get creeped out. And they started to feed different energy to this doll now. They're like, it's always following us. It's always watching us. This isn't safe. And then they're starting to get messages like, help me.
Yes.
And then the boyfriend, Debbie's boyfriend, was sleeping on the couch one afternoon, a Sunday afternoon. And he woke up and he said, I had a dream that Annabelle was choking me to death. He had never liked Annabelle. And he walked over to the doll, which was sitting in a chair, picked up, said, you're a stupid doll. You couldn't hurt anyone. Threw it across the room. And I'm thinking it had a tantrum because you just threw me across the room. And it made everything go crazy in the room, according to my grandfather. And the young man was clawed across the chest. At that point, they believe this is evil. That's when things change. Now, millions and millions of people are fascinated by this doll.
Yeah.
And that's what scares me, is what are we doing? Unfortunately, during COVID and even right now, people have thought that Annabelle has escaped. I just today had a guy in Brazil get a hold of me. Is Annabelle really on tour? I'm so afraid. Stop. Yes, that energy, if you interact with it, if you are in contact with it, can be dangerous. But it doesn't have godlike powers. It didn't start a fire outside of 60 miles away from where it was in New Orleans. It doesn't have that reach. It can be deadly, but only if you've interacted with it. So please don't worry about this thing being on tour if you're not there. Unfortunately, if you're somebody who's going over there, the people that are running this thing right now are literally telling people to touch the glass.
Oh, no.
Pushing people against it.
No.
Get up to it and we'll take a photo of you. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. I can tell you firsthand, if my mother would have gave me that doll and it started moving, it would have been bad from day one. Okay. There wouldn't have been no good experiences. I can assure you.
Yeah, this was the age of Aquarius. This was 1970. Right. They were all hippy and, like, wow, man, look at that.
I have to ask because I'm super curious. I'm assuming based on this egregore that you're talking about, that would probably, I said that right. That's the first time I've heard this terminology. Robert the doll, I would assume, would also fit into that same category because it seems like, again, it's just multiple people with the energy. Exactly.
But what's fascinating? Let's turn it on its head. Why don't we have manifestations of Santa Claus?
That's valid. That's valid.
Yeah. And the reason is that doesn't generate the same EMF. It's not fear. It's not terror. It's not pumping your heart so much. Little kids, maybe they get excited about Santa Claus, but not in the same way. I've only ever personally heard of one young man who swears up and down that he actually saw Santa Claus in his house when he was a child.
Super funny story, somewhat related. I wasn't devastated with Santa Claus learning to tell your kids to plug their ears. That was no longer there.
That thing that we think about, yes.
Yeah. The thing that blew my mind was the Easter Bunny. And do you know why?
No.
When I was a kid, when I was looking for eggs, I felt paw prints that led me to an Easter egg. Oh. And as an adult, I told my parents, I'm like, why would you do that to me? And they're like, we never did that. Now, could their feet have been wet? And that's how I found it? Possibly. They don't remember it happening. But to me, that was devastating because I'm like, I felt that. And it took me to an egg. So I know that one's legit. That one bothered me.
Yeah, I was really good at convincing my son that Santa Claus existed as well. He was pretty devastated when he found out. He was the last kid in his class. Oh, that's still a bad memory.
The thing I wonder, though, is I wonder if somehow I either manifested the thought process that there's supposed to be paw prints there, at least in my head. I'm not saying that they were there, but I manifested the thought. Or I wonder if that could potentially manifest something like that. Again, we're talking about energy. So, another thing that I think back to is we went on this, it was a ghost tour, as they called it. I don't like calling ghosts, but whatever. It was a ghost tour, and it was in Wilmington, North Carolina. And I just loved it because of the history. For one, you're telling ghost stories. For two, it's a history lesson. And we walked, it was 5 locations. They took us around Wilmington. And for anyone that doesn't know, that's a port town. So the ships would come back in the days. And we went to location 1, 2, 3, completely fine. We're walking up to the 4th location. There's nothing there. And I start getting sick, like sick.
Let me guess. It was a place where they auctioned slaves.
No, they hung pirates or people that, were doing mutinies. There was a courthouse that was once there. They then turned it into some sort of an office building years later. But then the gallows was right on that same site. And it was funny because I started getting sick. I told my wife, because we had a hot dog before then. I'm like, okay, there was something up with that hot dog. And I got sick and I'm like, I'm just going to lean back because I was like, if I'm going to get sick, I don't want to get sick in front of other people,
Right. Yeah, of course.
And he was talking, he says, anyone that's sensitive will get sick on this site. And my wife is like, well, my husband's not feeling good. And he said, have him walk 15 yards that direction, he'll be fine. She came to me and she told me, and I go, yeah, right. Walk 15 yards. I was completely fine. Only went to the 5th location and I was completely fine. I heard an interview where you talked about some of this and you said that a lot of times some of this energy will hit people's solar plexus.
Yes.
And that's the first time I'd ever heard that. So that was extremely fascinating to me completely.
According to practitioners of Reiki and people who believe in chakras, the solar plexus is the opening for the spirit realm to enter you. And I'm not a Reiki master, but that interests me because I have seen that women who consider themselves psychic, but who are not disciplined psychics, who've never been trained, they often have the most horrendous and strange intestinal problems and stomach problems.
Wow. Really
weird ones. But the funny thing, you're talking about pirates, and I was in Lima in Peru, and a team had brought me there. If I'm going to use my abilities, I cannot know anything about a site. Bring me in cold, let me do my thing. I don't want to know a thing. So we're walking through this maze. There were 4 gigantic structures like towers that created this still working military base, 500 years old. And we get into one of them, and there's this tiny, tiny corridor. Like I had to move sideways through it. And it goes like a horseshoe around a central room. And there are holes at about 4 feet high and 2 feet high. And I'm getting awful feelings, real sick, trapped, miserable. Turns out they would shove pirates into their completely naked. This was a Spanish fort, and the Spanish were pretty renowned for their inhumane ways of dealing with people. And they would shove food, like bread, through the 4 foot tall hole, and water through the 2 foot hole. And when people would die in there, they were jammed in so tight that they'd die standing.
Wow.
Yeah, and it left a hell of an impression. Yeah.
So I guess the question I would have then, because I'm not psychic. Like I don't have any of those capabilities. I wish I did. Trust me, I'd be way cooler of an investigator if I can sense whomever, right? I don't have that capability. I wish I did. But
I don't
why,
trust psychics without evidence ever.
see, and that's another question I was going to ask you. Why would I have stuff like that? Is that just some type of energy that my body taps
Empathy.
into? Okay.
Empathy is a form of psychic awareness. And if you can feel someone's pain, then you are somewhat psychic. Everyone has the capability. You know, when you're a child, there's a thing called neuroplasticity, and your brain is much more pliable when you're young. And we rewire our brains as psychics to accept data that we are not capable of understanding otherwise. Some people look into a mirror or a pool of water, or they use cards or automatic writing or seances or whatever. And that's what they're doing, is they're rewiring their brain to understand the input that they're getting. My theory is it's all EMF. It's all electromagnetic energy. And the human brain has to rewire itself to accept that data.
That's very interesting. When we leave this podcast, I have to ask you a question. I can't have it on air because it's a trade secret that I'm trying out for my investigation. I want other people to get it before me. So, but that's fascinating that you said that also. I guess I have a question then. I'm going to take you down this really weird rabbit hole, and I apologize. This has nothing to do with either one of our fields of expertise at all, especially yours. There was a supposedly there was this government project. It was called Project Montauk. Do you know anything about that project?
I remember the name. You'll have to remind me, though. It'll probably come to me.
So what it supposedly was these people in the government kidnapped these homeless children, and the whole point of it was to hook them up to some machine. People never elaborates on what the machine was, but what they did was they attempted to use fear to open a portal to another dimensional plane.
Okay.
And
I have a feeling those details may not be accurate.
I'm sure
I hope they're not.
Yeah.
But they've done fear studies like that where they've tried to open portals. They've done remote viewing and things like that as well. And the thing you have to understand, there was a little statistical anomaly there that made it likely, but not enough that they could trust it. But when you really look at the data, there was one individual in particular who was amazingly good at it, and everyone else brought that average down. It's kind of, to me, psychic abilities are like playing basketball. Pretty much everybody can bounce a ball and try to throw it into the hoop, but very few of them are going to be Michael Jordan.
Which makes sense. The biggest question I was going to ask on that is, it seems like even in that, regardless of what that project was or was not, they incorporated the thought process of there being fear with these children. And when we look at a lot of poltergeist cases, a lot of times if you look, and I always say, if I see this here and this here and this here and this here, eventually I go, why are these 4 things connected, or 5 things or 12 things, whatever it may be? And every single time I hear fear, children, and children are going to be typically more fearful. I think as humans, or women, correct. Yeah. But as we get older, obviously, I think our perception of what's real and what's fake kind of shifts. And especially for men, because, we're supposed to be the brave one,
We're also supposed to be skeptical and rational, but this brings us back to what you said earlier about the young lady from India.
Yes.
I have found on cases that the husband is normally the very last person to accept that something's going on in the house. Everyone else is reacting to it. They're getting afraid. It isn't until he's overwhelmed by all of that it starts to affect him. So I have no problem with people not believing what I do. I'm not here for them. Your skepticism is a wonderful armor. God bless you for it. But if you need help, I'm here for you. That's the people I'm trying to reach, just them.
And, I feel like, and I've said this numerous times before, and I've had skeptics even tell me on the things that I've said, dude, there's no way. That's never going to happen. That's not realistic. And I go, there's nothing I can do to prove to you that it did happen. And you're never going to believe it until you personally experience something to where you go, I don't know what that was. And some of the people that I think are the most amazing are the skeptical points of view. It's no different than you watch a YouTube video or a ghost show and they go, oh, what was that? Well, who knows what it was? It could have been the house setting. It could have been anything, you know, but if we say everything's a ghost, well, then that kind of, it deludes what it actually is. It's like for the investigations we're doing in September, this mixer is going. This mixer has 8 channels and I'm going to put a microphone in every single room. Why? Well, then I can triangulate where did that sound come from? Mm-hmm. And then we go and investigate what was that. Wildwood is another one. We're going to the Wildwood. Wildwood supposedly has this portal. And what they say is this portal, there's a great investigator. His name is John Griffin. And what he does, which is fascinating, I've never seen anyone do this before. His brother, Jeremy, he passed away and he talks to his brother through EVP. You can actually go back and you can see EVP. And the fascinating thing that he does, and I've not seen anyone else do this, he uses a fog machine and laser strobes to look for different anomalies that happens. And the theory is similar to what you was talking about with electromagnetic fields, is when you're putting the fog in there, you're creating a conduit to be able to allow more moisture in that air. And what the lasers does is you have a plane. He has pictures of an entity in the background. And when you combine that with a photo of his brother, same hair, same trench coat. And it's not a case of pareidolia, right? Like I look at a lot of stuff and I go, that's pareidolia.
Exactly what I was thinking, pareidolia.
Yeah. But in this case, it's too, and unlike that, like he doesn't typically zoom into the photos, kind of like what you talked about. But the other weird thing is the EVP that he does, or he also uses a, what do they call those? It's not a spirit box. It's the one where it takes out all the white noise.
Estes method?
No, the one where it actually cuts out the, I'm actually building one right now where it actually cuts out the echo noise, like the white noise, it takes all that out. Anyway, he has one of those and you can hear, he talks to his brother. And when you listen to it, same tone of voice, the same levels and the same, what I would call dialect. And I sit there and I go, we're looking for it first and foremost, right? Like if I hear something, I'm saying, I hope this is whomever it may be. But there becomes a certain point where I go, you know what? That's awful close. That's awful close. So is it plausible? Yes, I think that's definitely plausible. But he's doing amazing work with some things like the fog. I think there's something there. And on top of that, the way he does the photos is a little different. But a lot of these channels, they're looking for something and they're trying to create things. But here's my theory on that. And you're probably going to tell me I'm crazy for this too, but I believe that some of these investigation teams unwillingly are going into these locations and creating things that then get stuck there.
Actually, I haven't called you crazy once, and I'm certainly not going to here, but I am going to say something that's probably going to make you a little uncomfortable.
Okay.
I don't believe in going back in and reinvestigating places that have been solved, like the Conjuring House.
Yeah.
My grandparents closed that case. And if you're going in there with the intention of finding phenomena, then you're actually opening something up. You're trying to make things manifest again. If you're going into a haunted location, like a castle or asylum or whatever, you better be really careful that you're not bringing something home with you. You need to set those boundaries. And they may not work because we're talking about human beings. They have free will. And if you're on an ordinary day, I can walk by 100 people and say, excuse me, I need to get by. And they're going to move out of their way. But there's going to be that one jackass who's just not going to move.
Yeah.
And that's when you need to call people like me. But you keep mentioning these shows and everything. I want to make this so clear. Those are not reality. They are programming. They're there to sell dish soap. Do not believe you're learning anything about this. That's like watching ER and then going out and practicing surgery.
Right.
You can see how dated I am. I'm talking about Michael Jordan and ER, and it's like,
all my favorite things. We're good on that. If you was to give a playbook then, because I think that you're probably the person that people should listen to, what would be a code of conduct for those of, and even myself included? I mean, we're going in September. What would be a code of conduct from Chris that everyone should be following when we're obviously going to those locations, but what should we do?
Here's the thing, that's like asking, again, a doctor, how do I perform surgery?
Yeah.
But I'll give it to you as best I can. Go in with respect and humility. Go in with healthy skepticism. Go in there trying to disprove that it's paranormal, not prove it. You want to rule out everything natural before you're willing to accept the supernatural. And I don't even like the terms paranormal or supernatural. To me, it's all part of the real world. It's just things we don't quite understand yet.
Yeah.
To me, it's quantum physics that we haven't figured out. But announce your intentions when you're going into a home. I am here to help. I am here. And if possible, like for instance, where you're going, ask permission. That is not your place. You're not going in there to help a family that's in trouble. So you should be asking permission before you go in there. It's just right and proper, and they will respect you for that. So that's the better way to do it. And then close the door on your way out. You make sure, I cannot have anything follow me home. You may not follow me. Our session is done. I've done all I can do. There's no more. Do not follow me home. And I've had things follow me home anyway. Good things, in some cases. I could tell you a beautiful story if you like, but
absolutely,
that's what you start with.
Along that lines, because I'm super curious, because you said something I'm totally going to forget. Believe it or not, the house that I live in now, it's a relatively new house. We're the second owner of the home. Nothing paranormal. No one's died here. No one's had anything happen. This would be the lamest place for an investigator to come to. Okay.
Never investigate your own home. You'll be trapped with it. Right. You've manifested something in there. And I'm just saying, for people who just listen to you for a moment there, never do your own home. Let somebody else do it.
Well, here's what's fascinating about that. We started these podcasts 2.5 years ago. We started with the podcast, just me and Nick. And every October, it just happens to be the month, folks. Don't go in my comments saying October is the evil devil month or whatever. But in October, we do a segment where we allow our listeners to write in stories that happen to them, and we dramatize the stories. And the first year we did it, a weird series of events occurred that I can't explain. And it's not really happened since then, but a week before that podcast came out, my kids are all excited. We're going trick-or-treating, and we got a brand new fan put in our front room. And all of a sudden the fan kicked on just randomly. And I'm like, one of three things happened. Either we bought one and it's got voice activation. Like that's always my go-to now. Well, it's voice activated. We probably said turn on or something, or interpreted that's what we said and it turned on, whatever. Then I thought, well, maybe it's a case where the neighbors have a similar fan. So they press their button, fan kicks on, whatever. Third one was maybe it's a new fan. Maybe it just was wired wrong and it just kicks on.
Right.
Didn't think anything about it. But every time I came home, I didn't notice it. Honestly, didn't notice it. It was like the third or fourth day that I came home. My daughter said, "Why do you always turn the fan on when you come home?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Every time when you come home, you turn that fan on." And I said, "I'm not turning the fan on." And she goes, "Yeah, you do every single time." And then I just laughed it off and I kept going. My son had this outfit or this costume for Halloween. And it's one of those that has that fan on the outside. And as that fan goes off, it inflates that suit out.
Okay. Yeah.
He broke it with like an hour before Halloween. So I said, let me piece it together. I'm going to get it going again so you can go out in your costume. My father-in-law is sitting on the chair with his wife. My wife was somewhere else. My son's sitting there. As we're putting the fan on, I said, turn the fan on. And as I did it, like a split second later, the top fan kicks on out of nowhere.
Okay.
My father-in-law looks at me and said, what was that? And I said, I don't know. I just kept moving on. But the weird thing is, we do the podcast, everything's fine. Maybe 3 weeks later, I'm looking around. I go upstairs because I'm in my studio's in the basement. I go upstairs, and when I go upstairs, my cabinet doors, a few of them are open. And I'm like, my kids, man, they're lazy. Just close the door. Didn't think anything about it. I closed it. My wife and I are talking. And as I'm backing up, it felt like there was a hand on the middle of my back that pushed enough against my shirt to where it touched. Well, sometimes we put the laundry basket there and I'm like, oh, I'm tripping over the laundry basket. Turn around, nothing's there. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't justify what was happening. We didn't invite anything. I'm curious if the energy that we manifested from all of that podcast could potentially cause that kind of activity. Is that something that can happen?
No, I don't think so. Mm-hmm. I don't think so. I will not say no. Sure. What I would ask, though, is what was the podcast about? Because you could have, there's something called the law of recognition.
Okay.
You know, people think, oh, you go to a graveyard to communicate with the dead because that's where they are. No, you're not going to haunt your dead body. You don't care about your old car when you leave it behind. It's gone. They're there because you're there and remembering them there. That's why they're drawn to you. The same thing here, I think. You may have been talking about particular ghost or something, and it was letting you know, hey, I am here. I am here. I'm trying to let you know that. And energy manipulation is the simplest thing a spirit can do. They are energy. So I've had spirits send text messages now. Really? I used to start with the old phantom phone calls. Then it was answering machines. And I've even had a fax come through from the dead. But now they're getting texts. What I find fascinating is the spirits are learning to adapt to our technology, even if they die before that.
That's fascinating.
It is, yeah. So, growing up, I was a psychic, but I didn't know what that meant. My mother hates the paranormal, will have nothing to do with it. And my father, who is not Tony Spera, a man named Chris McKinnell, he did not believe at all. He thought my grandfather was a charlatan, didn't want to have anything to do with him. So I was going through all of this, and they had me going to psychologists and social workers and everything else, which is unfortunately typical with psychics growing up. But it was later that I realized, no, my aura was burning so brightly that I was attracting spirits that were lost. Wow. And looking for someone to communicate with. And that is a typical thing. People think, oh, I keep moving from house to house and it keeps following me. No, you just are a psychic who doesn't know about their own abilities, and you're constantly attracting new spirits, which is why you have to lay down spiritual boundaries every single day. You have to say it out loud because they can't read your mind. You actually have to say, no, you may not bother me. I cannot help you. You are not welcome in my home. You must leave. And it works.
Wow. I really want to be respectful of your time. And, I don't want to push you too far past what you said. I have absolutely been enamored by this entire conversation. I could ask you another 50 questions. We'd be here all night, but I'm not going to do that to you. I do think it's important that every one of my viewers or listeners, no matter where you're at and you're listening to this, Chris and his team are here to help. They want to be able to provide this no differently than what Ed and Lorraine did back in the day. And you do provide an amazing service differently. But what I mean is you still provide it to those that are looking for it, and there's no cost associated with it.
None at all. And no publicity. We will never talk about anything that could identify you. Will we talk about your case? If it can help someone else, absolutely. But we will not do it in a way that I identify you in any way.
Luckily, Chris provided me with all of his links. I want all of you to go down to the description below, no matter what platform it is that you're listening to. Definitely look him up. I'll be honest with you. I think I've binged almost everything I can find on him, and it's absolutely fascinating. I find it super fascinating. But again, the whole reason I wanted you to come here is because I feel like a lot of the same questions are always asked. And I'm like, man, I'd really love to know more about X, Y, and Z. And honestly, I just scratched the surface. I'm going to try to sweet talk him to come back on this podcast again so we can talk further about stuff. But thank you so very much for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do it for me.
That was my pleasure. I enjoyed speaking with you. This was a great interview.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, hopefully you all enjoy the podcast. Again, definitely check him out. Everything's going to be in the description down below. Until we see you in the next podcast, goodbye.